He doesn't need another person pretending to care. I'm not here to pretend anything. I'm here because I think I understand what everyone else has given up trying to see. Marcus Wellington studied the young woman standing before his glass-topped desk with calculating eyes. Her name was Emma Chen, late 20s, unremarkable credentials, no prestigious agency backing, no glowing testimonials from wealthy families. She wore worn jeans and a cream sweater, her only jewelry a thin gold chain around her neck. But her dark eyes held something that made him pause, a steadiness that seemed almost unnatural for someone interviewing for what had become an impossible position in his household. "Miss Chen," Marcus said, leaning back in his leather chair, "my son hasn't uttered a word in 18 months. He hasn't laughed, hasn't responded to any of the specialists, therapists, or caregivers we've brought in. He rejects contact with strangers. Frankly, he seems to reject the world entirely." "I understand," Emma replied quietly. Marcus frowned. "You lack the qualifications I typically require. What makes you think you can succeed where others have failed?" "Because I don't think Ryan needs someone with perfect credentials," she said. "I think he needs someone willing to meet him where he is, not where everyone expects him to be." Marcus studied her face. "And you believe you're that person?" Before we continue with today's story, if you're enjoying what you've heard so far, please hit that subscribe button. Every new subscriber helps me keep sharing these inspiring tales that touch your day. Thank you for your support. I believe I can try to be. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the manicured gardens stretched endlessly, as pristine and lifeless as the mansion had become since the accident. Finally, Marcus stood. 1 week. If there's no progress whatsoever, you're dismissed. Clear? Understood, Emma said, and without waiting for dismissal, she turned and walked from the room. The mansion held silence like a cathedral holds prayer, heavy, purposeful, and somehow sacred. Emma followed the housekeeper, Carmen, up the sweeping staircase, each footfall muffled by thick carpet. The walls displayed a gallery of family photographs that told their own story of loss. Early pictures showed Marcus younger and radiant, his arms around a woman with dancing eyes and wind-tossed hair, his late wife, Sarah. In others, he cradled a newborn at a baptism, his face glowing with pride. But as the photos progressed, the joy slowly drained away. Fewer smiles, more solitude. Marcus alone at business functions, shaking hands with colleagues, accepting awards. The warmth had leached from the images like color fading from old film. Carmen stopped before a cream-colored door at the corridor's end, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He's been in there since breakfast." Emma nodded, placing her hand carefully on the brass handle and turning it with the reverence of someone entering sacred space. The room was bright and airy, tall windows flooding it with afternoon light. Yet it felt sterile, untouched, like a museum display of childhood rather than a living space. Expensive toys lined shelves, their boxes never opened. A plush carpet showed vacuum tracks from that morning's cleaning. Even the curtains hung in perfect symmetry. And there, silhouetted against the window, sat Ryan. The 8-year-old boy was motionless in his wheelchair, a lap tray positioned across his arms. His sandy hair fell in gentle waves around a pale, delicate face. His blue eyes were open but vacant, staring at something beyond the glass that no one else could see. He didn't acknowledge her entrance, didn't blink, didn't shift, didn't breathe any differently. Emma stood in the doorway, her heart constricting at the profound stillness that seemed to emanate from such a small person. Then, moving with deliberate slowness, she entered and lowered herself to the floor beside his wheelchair. She didn't rush forward, didn't speak immediately. She simply sat cross-legged on the carpet, allowing the quiet to settle around them like snow. "I know the world feels too sharp right now," she finally whispered, her voice barely disturbing the air. "But I'll stay here until you remember it can be gentle too." No response came, not even the flicker of acknowledgement. But Emma remained, settling in for the long wait ahead. She stayed for hours. She didn't fill the silence with chatter or games or artificial enthusiasm. She hummed occasionally, so softly it was more breath than sound. She picked up a picture book from the corner and turned the pages slowly, not reading aloud but letting the illustrations speak for themselves. Every few minutes, she glanced at Ryan, not expectantly, just gently checking in. When Carmen appeared at the door asking about lunch, Emma shook her head. "I'll eat later." That evening, Marcus sat alone in his study, watching the security feed from Ryan's room, a habit born not of suspicion but of weary resignation. Too many caregivers had come and gone, too many tears shed, too many failures endured. He expected to see what he always saw, another well-meaning woman trying too hard, fidgeting, overwhelming his son with misguided energy. Instead, he found himself watching something entirely different. Emma sat in patient stillness, neither demanding nor withdrawing. She didn't pressure or prod. She simply existed in the space with Ryan, offering her presence like a gift with no strings attached. It unsettled Marcus in ways he couldn't name. Day 2 arrived without fanfare. Emma entered Ryan's room as she had before, greeting him with a soft smile and a gentle good morning. She placed a small, textured ball on the edge of his lap tray, not pushing it toward him, just making it available. He didn't touch it, didn't look at it. She didn't seem to mind. On day 3, she brought a book and read aloud in a voice like warm honey. The story was about a young fox who couldn't find his voice but discovered he could speak through kindness. Ryan's eyes didn't move from the window, but something in his posture seemed to soften almost imperceptibly. Day 4 brought music, a small wooden music box that played Pachelbel's canon. Emma placed it on the windowsill and let it run its course. The melody drifted through the room like sunlight through leaves, and for just a moment, Ryan's gaze shifted toward the sound. By Friday evening, Ryan still hadn't spoken, hadn't smiled, hadn't moved in any way most people would recognize as progress. But Emma noticed the subtle shifts, and so did Marcus, who found himself spending longer periods watching the monitor. On that final evening of the trial week, Marcus entered the room without announcement. He found Emma in her usual spot on the floor, turning pages of a book about a garden where flowers bloomed even in winter. Her voice was steady and calm as mountain stream water. She looked up when she sensed his presence, then glanced toward Ryan. And in that moment, something miraculous happened. Ryan's eyes flickered. Just for an instant, his gaze found his father's face. It was barely perceptible, gone almost before it began, but it was undeniably real. Marcus held her gaze for a long moment. "Another week?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled. Emma smiled softly, closing the book with reverent care. "I think he just said yes." The second week began without contracts or negotiations. Emma simply returned, as natural as sunrise, as if she had always been meant to be part of this quiet world. Unlike her predecessors who arrived armed with degrees and methodologies, Emma brought something different, a watering can and a small potted violet. While others had tried to impose structure and goals, Emma began creating sanctuary. She started with the unused playroom, a space that had gathered dust and disappointment in equal measure. The expensive toys were untouched monuments to failed hopes. The walls were painted a cold, institutional blue. Heavy drapes blocked most of the natural light. Emma opened the windows first, letting fresh air breathe life into the stagnant space. Then she began a gentle transformation, removing everything except a few soft animals and cushions, replacing the harsh overhead lighting with warm lamps, exchanging the rigid furniture for comfortable floor cushions and a woven rug in earth tones. She lined the windowsills with small plants and replaced the sterile wall art with watercolor prints of forests and meadows. Carmen watched from the doorway, eyes wide. "Aren't you worried about changing so much?" "I'm not changing anything," Emma replied, adjusting a lamp's position. "I'm just helping him remember what comfort feels like." Each alteration was intentional, designed to whisper rather than shout, to invite rather than demand. Emma understood that healing spaces needed to feel safe before they could feel hopeful. Ryan observed these changes with the same impassive expression, but Emma noticed he didn't retreat from them either. For her, that absence of resistance felt like victory. Marcus noticed everything from his office, where the security feed had become his window into a world he barely recognized. He had intended to check in briefly; instead, he found himself transfixed for hours. Emma moved with purpose but not urgency, with care but not anxiety. She never flinched when Ryan knocked something from his tray or went rigid in his chair. She didn't scold or correct, she simply accepted every silence, every stillness, every blank stare as a form of communication. Then came Thursday afternoon, when everything shifted. Golden light streamed through the newly opened windows, casting dancing shadows across the soft rug. Emma sat building towers with wooden blocks, letting Ryan watch if he chose to. She hummed quietly as she worked, not for his benefit but for her own pleasure, creating an atmosphere of contentment rather than expectation. Ryan, seemingly uninterested, picked up one of the blocks from his tray. Then, with deliberate force, he hurled it across the room. It clattered loudly against the hardwood floor. Emma didn't startle. She didn't lecture. She simply rose, retrieved the block, and gently returned it to his tray. Then, with infinite gentleness, she said, "Anger is just another way of talking." Ryan's hand hovered uncertainly over the remaining blocks. His brow furrowed in what might have been confusion or curiosity. Emma slowly extended her hand, not to take anything, just to rest it beside his on the tray. Minutes crawled by in sacred silence. Then, in the quietest moment imaginable, Ryan's small fingers brushed against hers. The touch was feather-light, tentative, but he didn't pull away. Neither did she. Emma didn't gasp or celebrate. She simply turned her palm upward and left it there, open, available, patient. Marcus witnessed it all from the doorway, having arrived to check on them just as the miracle unfolded. He stood frozen, watching his son, his silent, unreachable, heartbroken son, choose connection over isolation for the first time in 18 months. Later that evening, when Emma passed him in the hallway, Marcus stopped her. "He reached for you," he said, his voice thick with unnamed emotions. She nodded. "In his own way." Marcus stared at her, searching her face. "You're different from the others." I didn't come here to do a job, she said quietly. I came to belong somewhere. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Marcus Wellington found himself speechless. Marcus had always been a man of motion, conference calls before dawn, back-to-back meetings, decisions made in milliseconds between one task and the next. But lately, he found himself slowing down, lingering in hallways, standing longer in doorways. He was drawn to observe Emma's work with Ryan, though he couldn't quite name what fascinated him so completely. There were no lesson plans, no therapeutic protocols, just presence. Yet somehow, impossibly, it was working. Ryan responded not with words yet, but with attention. His eyes followed Emma's movements. His fingers curled slightly when she placed toys near him. He remained still during story time instead of turning away. Marcus found himself disturbed by how much he noticed these small changes, and even more disturbed by how much he noticed Emma herself. One morning, passing the sunroom on his way to the office, he paused. Emma sat cross-legged on the floor, building block towers with Ryan again. This time, instead of throwing the blocks, Ryan simply watched her hands move with what might have been curiosity. Marcus watched for several minutes, unnoticed. Something unfamiliar stirred in his chest, not just hope for his son, but something warmer and more complicated. He forced himself to walk away. That afternoon, Emma found him in the garden, scrolling through emails on his tablet beneath the old oak tree. "You come out here often," she observed, settling onto the bench across from him. "It's peaceful," he replied without looking up. She tilted her head. "More peaceful than inside a house where your son is learning to trust again?" Marcus went still. She hadn't meant it as an accusation, but it landed like one anyway. "That's not what I meant," she said quickly. "I just wondered, do you ever let yourself be happy around him?" Marcus set down the tablet, his jaw tightening. "What kind of question is that?" "The kind that matters," she said gently. "Children absorb what we don't say." "Maybe he thinks you're still disappointed in him." Marcus stood abruptly. "I'm not disappointed in him." "Then what?" "I'm furious at the universe," he said, his voice rising despite himself. "At the drunk driver who took my wife. At the doctors who couldn't fix what was broken. At myself for not being enough to bring him back." Emma looked up at him steadily. "And that's what he sees, a father drowning in his own grief." Marcus turned away, fists clenched. "You think joy will magically heal him? You think smiling will make him walk again?" "No," she said softly. "But it might help him believe he's still worth loving, exactly as he is." Her words hung in the air between them like morning mist. Marcus wanted to argue, to dismiss her simplistic psychology, but something in her voice stopped him. "I lost my father when I was 7, Emma continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I stopped talking for 6 months, not because I couldn't, but because everyone around me was so consumed by their own grief, they forgot to ask what I needed." Marcus turned back slowly, his anger deflating. "Sometimes silence isn't the child's wound," she said. "It's everyone else's." He didn't respond, but he didn't leave either. That night, Marcus found himself wandering the halls longer than usual. He passed the sunroom, intending to continue to his study, but light spilling from the doorway made him pause. Through the crack, he saw Emma sitting beside Ryan's wheelchair with watercolors spread across a low table. Ryan had one small hand dipped in blue paint, while Emma's fingers were bright green. See, she whispered. Messy is beautiful. Messy means we're alive. Gently, she guided Ryan's painted hand toward the paper. He let her. Together, they pressed his palm down and lifted it, leaving behind a perfect handprint in cerulean blue. Emma laughed softly, not forced or performative, but genuine delight. Look at that masterpiece. Ryan blinked, and then, miracle of miracles, he smiled. It was small, uncertain, just the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. But it was undeniably, beautifully real. Marcus gripped the doorframe to keep from falling. He hadn't seen that expression since before the accident, had almost forgotten his son was capable of joy. The boy who had retreated from the world had just chosen to rejoin it, if only for a moment. And it wasn't for him. It was for her. He backed away quietly before either of them could notice him, walking down the hallway with his heart thundering against his ribs. He wasn't sure what he felt, but for the first time in 18 months, numbness wasn't part of it. Ryan was changing, not dramatically, not like flipping a switch, but gradually, like winter slowly surrendering to spring. The changes were subtle at first, longer periods of eye contact, relaxed shoulders, a second smile that appeared 3 days after the first. Then came the sound that changed everything, a small laugh, barely more than a breath, but unmistakably joyful. Marcus began appearing in person rather than watching through screens, standing at the edges of activities, lingering during story time. Ryan no longer shrank from his presence. The boy still didn't speak, but he looked, he listened, and most importantly, he engaged. Emma, with her infinite patience, introduced a communication board, a large panel covered with pictures, symbols, and simple words. She taught Ryan to point to yes, no, hungry, tired, happy, sad. His movements were unsteady at first, his hand trembling with effort, but each successful communication brightened his eyes a little more. He's asking, Marcus whispered to Emma after Ryan pointed to the symbol for more when his favorite song ended. He always was, Emma replied with a smile. We just didn't know how to listen. One morning, Emma slipped out to take a phone call, leaving Marcus alone with Ryan at the breakfast table. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but fragile with possibility. Marcus cleared his throat. Those pancakes okay? Ryan looked down at his plate, then slowly raised his hand and pointed to the symbol for good on the communication board beside him. Marcus felt something crack open in his chest, surprise, relief, maybe even joy. Yeah? You like them? Ryan tapped the table twice, something Emma had taught him meant yes. I'm sorry I didn't learn this sooner, Marcus said quietly. I'm sorry for a lot of things. Ryan didn't respond, but he didn't look away either. For the first time in 18 months, father and son sat together in comfortable silence, and it felt like the beginning of something precious. Over the following weeks, their days settled into rhythms that felt surprisingly natural. Emma orchestrated it all without seeming to try, suggesting Marcus join bedtime stories, encouraging family meals, setting 3 places instead of 2. She never pushed, simply opened doors and let them walk through together. Marcus found himself reading to Ryan every night, stumbling over silly voices but getting better. Ryan's laughter, soft and rare but genuine, had become the house's most treasured sound. One evening, Emma stayed late to clean up art supplies. Ryan had spent the afternoon painting, dipping his fingers in bright colors and pressing them onto thick paper with growing confidence. She left the stack of artwork on the kitchen counter before heading home. Later that night, Marcus passed by and picked up the top piece. It was a child's painting, rough, uneven, but radiating joy. 3 stick figures stood side by side, the tallest with dark hair, the smallest in a wheelchair, and between them, a woman with long brown hair wearing a yellow dress. Above them, spelled out in uneven letters cut from Emma's symbol collection, were 2 simple words, "My family." Marcus's hands trembled as he traced the painted figures. His eyes burned, and for several minutes, he couldn't move. Emma wasn't just the woman who had taught his son to smile again, she had become the center of the world Ryan was learning to inhabit. He placed the painting back reverently, as if it were something sacred. Standing in the darkened kitchen, wrapped in silence that no longer felt empty, he whispered to the night, "Thank you." He wasn't sure if he meant it for Ryan, for Emma, or for whatever force had brought her to them. Perhaps all 3. The restaurant was intimate, tucked away on a quiet street far from the upscale establishments Marcus usually frequented. But tonight wasn't about impressing anyone, it was about understanding, about gratitude, about something he couldn't quite name yet. Emma arrived in a simple black dress, her hair loose around her shoulders, carrying herself with the same quiet grace she brought to everything. Marcus stood when she entered, nervous in a way that felt foreign and somehow wonderful. "Thank you for agreeing to this," he said. "I almost said no," she admitted with a small smile. "But Carmen mentioned you'd been practicing what to say in the mirror." He laughed, actually laughed. "Remind me to have a word with Carmen about discretion." They talked easily at first, Ryan's progress, funny moments from the week, Emma's collection of vintage children's books, Marcus's complete inability to make anything edible. But as the evening progressed, the conversation deepened. "I need to understand," Marcus said finally, leaning forward. "You appeared out of nowhere and gave my son what a dozen specialists couldn't." "How?" Emma was quiet for a long moment, turning her water glass slowly. "I didn't appear from nowhere," she said finally. "What do you mean?" She took a breath, seeming to gather courage. "I grew up in foster care. 7 different homes before I aged out of the system. Most weren't kind places." Marcus's expression darkened, his hands flattening against the table. "I stopped speaking when I was 8, Emma continued. "Not because I couldn't, but because I learned that silence was safer. If I didn't cry, I wouldn't be hit for being too loud. If I didn't ask questions, I wouldn't be punished for being inconvenient." His throat tightened. "Emma." "It lasted 2 years," she said. "Then I was placed with a woman named Grace. She was a retired speech therapist who lived in a tiny house with more books than furniture. She never asked me to talk. She just existed alongside me. Made me tea. Let me draw. Sat with me in perfect silence." Emma's eyes grew soft with memory. "She taught me that sometimes love sounds like nothing at all, just showing up, staying present, not leaving when things get hard." "Did she adopt you?" Marcus asked gently. "She did, when I was 12. The first word I spoke again was home, because she asked what I wanted most for my birthday." Marcus felt something shift inside his chest, a loosening of knots he'd carried for so long he'd forgotten they were there. "She died 3 years ago," Emma said. "Cancer. But everything I am, everything I understand about healing, it comes from her." "And that's why you do this work?" Emma nodded. I studied child psychology, got my license, but I didn't want to sit in an office analyzing symptoms. I wanted to go where the quietest children were, the ones who weren't screaming but were still in pain. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. When I saw Ryan's case file, something in me recognized him immediately. It was like seeing a photograph of my younger self. Marcus reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "You have no idea what you've given us," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You didn't just help my son, you gave him back to me. You gave me back to myself." Emma's eyes filled with tears she didn't try to hide. "I wasn't trying to save anyone," she whispered. "I know," he replied. "That's what makes it real." They sat together in the soft restaurant lighting, two people shaped by loss but learning to hope again, holding on to something neither dared name yet but both felt growing between them. It started with a cough Ryan couldn't shake, then a fever that climbed dangerously high. By 2 a.m, he was burning with heat, his breathing shallow and labored. Marcus had never driven so recklessly in his life, racing through empty streets with his unconscious son in the back seat. At the hospital, doctors moved with practiced urgency. Blood draws, 4 lines, chest x-rays. They spoke in medical shorthand: bacterial infection, dehydration, respiratory complications. Marcus could only nod numbly as they wheeled Ryan away for more tests. He called Carmen first, then Emma. She arrived within 20 minutes, hair still wet from a hurried shower, wearing sneakers and an old sweatshirt. She rushed into the waiting room with wide, frightened eyes. But Marcus stood and blocked her path. "You can't be here," he said, his voice sharp and brittle. Emma stopped short. "What?" "This is my fault. All those activities, the constant stimulation, pushing him when he wasn't ready. You've been working him too hard." "Marcus, I've been careful. He's 7 years old, not a case study," Marcus snapped. "Not your project to fix." The words were knives, and he could see them cutting her. But fear and guilt made him cruel. Emma's face went pale, then composed. "I understand," she said quietly. She turned and walked away, leaving only a small leather journal on the waiting room chair. Marcus didn't touch it for hours, not until exhaustion and remorse finally overtook his pride. Inside, he found pages of handwritten notes, observations, progress markers, personal reflections, small drawings, photographs of handprints and block towers. Woven through it all was something he hadn't expected to find: love. Deep, unconditional, selfless love. Today he laughed at bubbles floating in the sunlight. Not at me, at the joy itself. It was enough. He doesn't need to be normal to be complete. He needs to be seen for who he is, not who we want him to become. Sometimes I worry I'm giving him too much of my heart. Then he touches my hand and I realize I'm not losing anything, I'm gaining everything. Each page revealed the depth of Emma's devotion, the careful attention she paid to every small victory, every setback, every moment of connection. Marcus read until his vision blurred with tears he'd been holding back for months. The final entry made his breath catch. "If I have to leave, I want him to know. He taught me that healing isn't about returning to who you were before. It's about becoming who you're meant to be. He taught me that silence can be full of music, that stillness can be full of life, that broken doesn't mean worthless. He gave me back my faith in quiet miracles." Marcus closed the journal and pressed it to his chest, crying for the first time since the accident, for his son, for his wife, for Emma, for all the ways fear had made him blind to the gifts right in front of him. Ryan stirred the next afternoon, his eyelids fluttering open slowly. Marcus was beside him instantly, gripping his small hand gently. "Hey, buddy," he whispered. "You're okay. You're safe." Ryan blinked slowly, then looked toward the communication board Carmen had brought from home. His hand moved weakly but deliberately, pointing to two symbols, Where and Emma. Marcus's heart clenched. "She's not here right now," he said softly. "But I'm going to fix that." He leaned closer, brushing Ryan's hair back with infinite tenderness. "She's not just your caregiver," he said, more to himself than to the boy. "She's the reason we're a family again." Ryan looked up at him with eyes that held a question Marcus finally understood how to answer. "I'm bringing her home," he promised. It took Marcus most of the next day to find her. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Her small apartment was empty, plants watered but no sign of recent occupancy. But Carmen remembered Emma mentioning a community center where she sometimes volunteered with children on weekends. That's where he found her, in a sunny room filled with easels and laughter, helping a young girl paint flowers on canvas. She was smiling, genuinely happy, but when she looked up and saw Marcus, the light dimmed. "Hello," he said softly. "Hi," she replied, setting down her brush and walking outside with him. They stood in the small garden behind the building, autumn wind playing with the leaves around their feet. "I was wrong," Marcus said without preamble. "Completely, terribly wrong." Emma wrapped her arms around herself but said nothing. "I panicked when he got sick. Instead of protecting him, I destroyed the one thing that had brought him back to life." He stepped closer. "I'm not here just because of him." She looked at him carefully. "No? I'm here because when you left, the house didn't just go quiet, it went hollow. Because for the first time since I lost Sarah, I felt alive again. Not just as a father, but as a man." His voice grew thick with emotion. "And that was because of you." Emma's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Do you want me back for Ryan, or for yourself?" Marcus reached out, his fingers finding hers. "I want you to come home," he said, "because somewhere along the way, you became my heart walking around outside my body. Both of you did." She studied his face for a long moment, then whispered, "You hurt me, Marcus." "I know," he said. "And I'll spend however long it takes proving I never will again." Emma looked down at their joined hands, feeling the sincerity in his touch, the truth in his voice. Finally, she nodded. "Okay," she said simply. She returned the next day, but not as an employee, as family. Ryan's face transformed when she walked through his hospital room door, reaching out with pure joy and relief. She dropped to her knees beside his bed, embracing him with tears streaming down her face. "I missed you more than words," she whispered. That evening, Marcus joined them in the hospital room. For the first time in months, the three of them were together, and something that had been fractured felt whole again. 2 days later, they brought Ryan home. The house felt different somehow, warmer, more alive. They settled into new rhythms, gentler ones, built on presence rather than progress, on connection rather than goals. A year later, the mansion no longer echoed with emptiness. It hummed with quiet life, footsteps on stairs, soft conversations, the distant sound of piano music drifting from the sunroom. Ryan's artwork covered the refrigerator and spilled onto nearby walls. His wheelchair had been joined by forearm crutches, and beside those, a walker waited patiently for the day he felt ready. It was a Wednesday morning, bright with spring sunshine, when it happened. Emma had just returned from the garden when she saw Ryan standing with his physical therapist near the front windows. Marcus was there too, watching with the careful hope of someone afraid to believe. Ryan's hands gripped his walker, his face tight with concentration. One foot moved forward, then the other. Step, pause, breathe, step. Emma gasped, covering her mouth with soil-stained hands. That's it, Marcus said softly. You're doing it, son. 3 more steps brought Ryan to where they waited. They didn't rush him or cheer too loudly, they simply met him halfway, kneeling to embrace him with the kind of love that needs no words. That night, they celebrated quietly in the garden where Emma had first challenged Marcus to find joy again. Under the old oak tree where she'd found him hiding from happiness, he took her hand and asked her to marry him, not with a ring or grand gestures, but with simple truth. I never believed in forever, Emma said, tears streaming down her face. Neither did I, Marcus whispered, until you showed me what it looked like. They married the following month in that same garden, with Ryan as their ring bearer and Carmen crying happy tears from the front row. No elaborate ceremony, just promises made under open sky, to choose each other daily, to listen before speaking, to never stop believing in quiet miracles. When it was over, Ryan wheeled himself forward, beaming. In his lap was a painting, 3 figures more detailed than ever before. Marcus in his dark suit, Emma in her flowing white dress, Ryan between them, standing tall with his walker. Above them, in careful letters that showed months of practice, he had written, Dad, Mom, me, forever family. The word mom hung in the air like a bell that had finally been rung. Emma knelt before him, tears falling freely. Say it again, she whispered. Ryan touched her cheek with paint-stained fingers. Mom, he said clearly, the first word he'd spoken aloud in 2 years. Marcus crouched beside them, his own voice breaking. You did it, buddy. No, Emma said, gathering them both close. We all did. The seasons turned as they always do, and on one golden evening when the light fell like honey across the gardens, Emma and Ryan walked side by side down the gravel path. He used his walker confidently now, his steps sure and strong. She matched his pace, her hand light on his shoulder. Marcus followed behind, content to watch his family move through the world they'd built together, not with blueprints or money, but with patience, presence, and the revolutionary act of loving someone exactly as they are. They stopped at the front gate where a new sign hung, its letters carved deep into weathered wood. Here lives a boy who found his voice, a man who learned to love again, and a woman who showed them both what home really means. Emma traced the words with her fingertips. Ryan grinned up at her. Marcus kissed the top of her head, and together they turned back toward the house that had become a home, not through grand renovations, but through the daily choice to show up for each other. What had begun in silence had become symphony. What was broken had become beautiful. And in one quiet house, a boy discovered his voice, a man opened his heart, and a woman reminded them both that love, patient, present, persistent love, could heal anything. If this story touched something in your heart, if it reminded you that healing happens in whispers, not shouts, we invite you to join our community. Subscribe to Gentle Awakenings for more stories of resilience, connection, and the quiet miracles that happen when we choose to see each other clearly. Because here, every story is a reminder that love always finds a way to speak, even in the deepest silence.